All right, Rabbi say, we talk about, after Yom Kippur, we talk about going mechayel el chayel to build the sukkah, but the truth of the matter is that the learning after Simchas Torah, that's really mechayel el chayel. The thing is that it's easy to tell the regular person to just bang a nail into a sukkah. To tell a person after a long avodah of Simchas Torah to go and sit and learn, it might not be something that the average person is able to do. They have to rest after a long Yom Tov. But the Olam is really, we danced with the Torah, we hugged the Torah, we say we love the Torah, and we want to embrace it, and then to come and learn. Today's first daf is a really hard daf. It's not a simple daf, and to come and learn it together, it's really a wonderful thing. We are sponsored by the Shalom Fogel, Lili Nishmas, Yaakov Zev ben Yehuda Aryeh, Rivka bas Yaakov Yosef, Tzivya Miriam bas Gad, Yosef ben Tzivya ben Yaakov Zev. And for a great shidduch for Chaya Tzivya bas Shoshana Gittel, we are sponsored by A.B. Spry. We are sponsored by Baruch Ian, Lili Nishmas, Yaakov Chaim ben Abba, Esther bas Yona, Avram ben Shmuel HaKayin, and Refuah Shalema for Liba bas Anya. We are sponsored for the physical, emotional, and spiritual protection of Yeshua Menachem Mendel ben Bela Shendel Rivka. We are sponsored by Mark Frankel in loving memory of his father Yisrael Tzvi ben Chaim Yeshua Falik, and we're sponsored by Berish Kesseman, Refuah Shalema for Shoshana bas Adina Chana. She should have Refuah Shalema l'Seich Sharchel Yisrael. And we are holding on the bottom of Chuf Tes Amud Beis at the start of the Gemara. So let me give a preface a little bit first. We learned in the Mishnah that if you have a machshava of chutz l'zmanai in one of the four avodas hadam, that you're going to either eat it after its time or smoke it up after its time, that's pigel, and that's karas. If you have a machshava of chutz l'mekaymai, that you're going to do it outside of its place, that's pasul ve'ein by karas. We then learned the sheet of the Rabbanon, that if you have a machshava of chutz l'zmanai, and then you also have a machshava of chutz l'mekaymai, that's considered irav machashavais, and it can't be karas anymore. It can only be karas if the only thing you had wrong is a machshava of chutz l'zmanai. If you have a machshava also of chutz l'mekaymai, it's only puzzle, it's no karas. Comes along Reb Yehuda, and Reb Yehuda says it depends which machshava you had first. If you had the machshava of chutz l'zmanai first, that's it. It's pigel. Once it's pigel, you cannot erase the pigel. So even though you have a machshava of chutz l'mekaymai afterwards, it's still an isur karas. If you have the machshava of chutz l'mekaymai first, however, then even if you have the machshava of chutz l'zmanai afterwards, it's only pasul ve'ein by karas. Now, the first thing that we're going to tackle is Rabbi Yehuda says if you have the machshav of chutz l'zmanai of pigel first, it's an isur karas no matter what. Gemara wants to know, is that even if you had the machshav of chutz l'mekaymai in the same avodah, so that if you shecht and when you do the shechita, you have a machshav of chutz l'zmanai and then chutz l'mekaymai, it's still going to be karas? Or is it only if you had the machshav of chutz l'zmanai in the avodah of shechita, and then the machshav of chutz l'mekaymai in another avodah, like halacha, kabbalah, or zrika? But if you have them both in the same avodah, even Rabbi Yehuda agrees that that's Erev Machshavos, and it doesn't have an Issachar. That's going to be the Gemara's first inquiry. Let's see it inside. Amar Ilfa, Machlokes between Rabban and Rabbi Yehuda, b'shtei avodas. Aval avodah achas, but even according to Rabbi Yehuda, if he has a machshava first chutz l'zmanai of pigel, and then chutz l'mekayim in the same avodah, in the same shchita, or in the same oilacha, Divra Akol Erev Machshavas Avi, it's considered a mingling of Machshavas, and there's no Issachars. Rabbi Yochanan says no. Rabbi Yehuda is consistent. If you have a Machshava Pigel first, it cannot be, the Issachars cannot be erased. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Af Ba'avoda Achas Machlokes. That even in one Avodah, Rabbi Yehuda holds that if you had a machshava of chutz l'zmanai first and then chutz l'mekaymai, it's still going to be pigel. So the Gemara says, Bishlayma le'ilfa midareisha b'shtei avodas. Since the Reisha talks about a case where it's in two avodas, where you did the shchita for one thing and then another avodah for something else, so Seifa Nami b'shtei avodas. The Seifa where Rabbi Yehuda says his din is also only by two avodas. El Rabbi Yochanan, Reisha b'shtei avodas, the Reisha says you do one machshava in shchita and one machshava in Kabbalah, and Seifa where Rabbi Yehuda says his din, it's even b'avodah achas. So the Gemara says yes. Reisha b'shtei avodas, Seifa bein b'avodah achas, bein b'shtei avodas. Rabbi Yehuda says that even if he first has machshava of chutz l'zmanai and then chutz l'mechayimai, even in the same avodah of shchita, it remains pigel and karos. Now the Gemara will bring a pretty good raya to Rabbi Yochanan. Tanan, Rabbi Yehuda, Zakla. This is the principle. In machshavas hazman kodma l'machshavas hamakayim. If first he has the machshava pigel, and it precedes the machshava of chutz l'mekaymai pigel, because once it's pigel, it remains pigel, the chayav and olav karos. Now, why does it have to say the zaklal? It already said that that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. So, Bishloim el Rabbi Yochanan, it says the zaklal to include even if it's the two machshavas were in the same avodah. Hainu diktani zaklal. El le'ilfa. Why do we have to say, what does the zaklal come to include? My zaklal, says the Gemara kasha. So the Gemara, and from hence onward, the Gemara is going to assume, like Rabbi Yochanan, that according to Rabbi Yehuda, even if it was in one avodah, once you have a mind of a machshava of chutz l'zmanai, it becomes pigel, and we say tfos lashon rishon, and it remains an issachar. So now, the Gemara takes us into an interesting discussion. Tanan Osam. We learned over there, we learned it in Masechtas Nadarim, we learned it in Tmura. If, let's say, you need a particular dunderhead for this, I'm just thinking of somebody that we didn't call on very often. Marshall Castle. I just was waiting for you to show up. No, because this really has your name on it. This case.
I'll sign it with a Sharpie.
Tanan Osam. Harizu Tmuras Oila Tmuras Shmam. Marshall says about an animal that it should be an exchange for an oila, an exchange for a shlom. Now you know, Rabbi Yisai, that once it's an oila, it can't be a shlom. And that's the opinion of Rameir. Twice lashon rishon. So therefore, harizu tmuras oila. It remains an oila, and the animal is offered up entirely on the mizbeach. Divrei Rameir. Rabbi Yossi says, we ask Marshall, what did you mean? If Marshall wanted it to be both, So since Marshall doesn't have divine powers, Hashem is able to say Zacha v'Shama b'dibur echad. But Marshall can't say Oyla and Shlomim b'dibur echad. So Rabbi Yossi says, we ask Marshall, if Marshall says, I want them to be both, Amar Rabbi Yossi, im lekach nischavim tchila, hoyel v'i efshir lahoitzi shtei shemois ka'achas, you can't say them both at the same time. Just can't do that. So therefore, dvar of kayamit, therefore we say that the animal should be left out to pasture until it gets a blemish, because unblemished we can't redeem it. It goes out to pasture until it gets a blemish, and then we redeem it and use half to buy an oila and half to buy a shlomim. On the other hand, if Marshall says, no, I thought about Tmuras Oila, and then I said, I'm being crazy. From an oila, I can't eat anything. If I bring a shlomim, I could have, really good party. So, v'nimlach v'amar arizu Tmuras Shlomim, so then even Rabbi Yossi is mighty. You can't change your mind. Once you said it's an oila, there's no backsies. So then, harizu oila. So now, the Gemara says, but what about if we get fancier? Ibayalahu. Instead of repeating the words Tmuras Oila, Tmuras Shlomim, he said, Arizu Tmuras Oila Ushlamim. Be an exchange for an Oila and a Shlamim. So there, he actually said it together. Will Rameir agree with Rabbi Yossi? Mao, do we say that dear Rameir agrees that he meant them both at the same time? Or do we say, no, Rameir here also says twice Lashon Rishon. Once he says Oila, it's mispashet in the whole animal, the kedusha of an Oila, and the Shlomim can't be chal. Then the Gemara declares one more shaila. Lachatzais mahu. Says Rashi, this is an imtim tzalaima. Imtim tzalaima, if he says Tmuras Oila Ushlamim, Rameir says once he says Oila, the Kedushas Oila spreads through the whole animal and it's too late. It can't come a Shlamim. What about if he says Behema zu lachtzais la'oila u'l'shlamim? This behema should be halved for an oila and a shlamim. That's pretty beferish. What about in that case? Do we say that dear Rameir's maida, he said halved? Or do we say no? Once the half gets an oila, Rameir says the kedushas oila spreads through the whole animal, and it is still only an oila. So we have a machlokes here between Abaye and Rava. Amar Abaye b'ha v'adei moida Rameir. No, in the case of oila ushlamim and the case of lachatzais, even Rameir is moida that it's both an oila and a shlamim, and we let it out to pasture until it gets a mum. We sell it and we buy half an oila and half a shlamim. Rava says no, adayini machlokes. It's still an argument. Amar Rava, so no, Rava pursues according to Abaye, who says that in the case of Tmuras Oila Ushlamim, even Rameir agrees that we say it means together. And in our parlance, it means an Erev Machshavos. It means that we put them together. So Amar Rava L'Abaye l'didach da Amrit b'ha v'adei moida Rameir harei shchita. Remember, I told you now we're going according to Rabbi Yochanan. That Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Yehuda says his din, even if you shecht with a machshava of chutz l'zmanai and chutz l'mekaymai in one avoda. Harei shchita, the lechi lachatz is dummy. It's as if you're saying half for this and half for that. Because the case of Shechita is where he says that he's shechting a kezayis for chutz l'zmanai and a kezayis for chutz l'mekaymai. So there it's clearly two separate things. Right? It's a half for chutz one kezayis for chutz l'zmanai, and one kezayis for chutz l'mekaymai. So, if according to Abaye, even Rav Meir agrees, but Upligi, even in that case, Rabbi Yehuda argues and says we say Tfais Lashon Rishon, and we say that it's Pigel, and we only pay attention to the Machshav of Chutz L'Zmanai for the first Kazayas. So the Gemara says, yeah, because that's different. You see, if you would hold Eina l'shchita ela l'b'sayif, that the critical time of shchita is only at the final last cut of the second siman, so then the two kizaysim of chutz l'zmanai and chutz l'mekayim would come at the same time. So then you could say that it would be Erev Machshavas. It would be a combination. Amalei mi savrid eina l'shchita ela l'b'sayif. Do you think that shchita is only chal at the last moment? Yeshna l'shchita mitchila v'atzayif. There is shchita from the beginning to the end. And when it says, when Rabbi Yehuda says he has in mind for a kezayis chutz l'zmanai and a kezayis chutz l'mekaymai, it's talking about the Amar Siman Rishon, when he cuts the esophagus, he has in mind chutz l'zmanai. And Siman Sheni, the second Shimon, chutz l'mekaymai. So therefore, that's why it doesn't combine. It's not Erev Machshavas. Says the Gemara, but Hari Kmitza, when he takes the handful, a handful you can't split into two parts. He takes the handful, kezayis for chutz l'zmanai and the kezayis chutz l'mekaymai, and yet Rabbi Yehuda says we don't say Erev Machshavas, but we say Tfais Lashon Rishon, and it remains pigel. The l'chi lachatza is dummy. It's as if he's saying half for this and half for that, and still Rabbi Yehuda says Tfais Lashon Rishon or pligi. Says the Gemara, no. Over there, it's also in two different stages. Hasam Nami, there also, Shehikter Kaimetz Mincha Chutz L'Zmanai, he was maktir the kmitza of the flour for Chutz L'Zmanai, and there's another component, the kmitza of the frankincense, and Kaimetz Levina Chutz L'Mekaymai. Says Gemara, that's good by a regular mincha. But a minchas chayte that doesn't have levina, what are you going to say? Hari kaimitz the minchas chayte the lek levina ba'adei or pligi. Says, you're right. In that case, Rabbi Yehuda won't argue. By a minchas chayte, if he does the kmitz of the flour, the machshav of chutz l'zmanai or chutz l'mekaymai, maybe it's taken not pigel even according to Rabbi Yehuda. Says, loy pligi. Well, says the Gemara, even by a mincha v'chayte, we could still split it into two parts, because you have to walk to the mizbeach. So he does some steps for chutz l'zmanai and some steps for chutz l'mekaymai. Rav Ashi imtim tzaleima pligi b'psiyos, and the steps to the altar. Now Rav Shimi bar Ashi masnei kidabaya. Rav Shimi bar Ashi teaches like Abaya, that in the case of Tmuras Oila and Tmuras Shlamim, Tmuras Oila Ushlamim, and the case of Lachatzais, there Rameya is Maida, and that we say that we let the animal get a blemish and we bring a Oila and a Shlamim, while Ravuna bar Nosan Masnei Kedarava, that even over there Rameya argues, and we say Tfais Lashon Rishon. Okay, just getting underway. I have I have some good news for you. The good news for you is that the second daf is easier than the first daf. So once we get through the first daf, it'll be easier. But you know something? We didn't celebrate a whole Simchas Torah for only easy. Right? We want Lefum Tzara Agra.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I'm going in for surgery tomorrow. My name is Moshe Yitzchak Alevi Ben Choma.
Moshe Yitzchak Alevi Ben Choma, you should have a refuah shalema, a successful surgery, and you should be back quickly to the daf.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Will this talk take deeper comment in, or does it not play a role?
We're not talking about Tekadei Dibra.
So it's false Lashon Rishon is
We're not talking,
outside.
right, we're not talking about Tekadei Dibra. Now, Mark Frankel just joined us because, it's hard enough Gemara, but he didn't want the Akdama because he wants to do it, the hard way. He doesn't want to, he doesn't want to have prefaces and, that's for wimps. So, Mark, we're holding 5 lines from the bottom of Lamed Amud Aleph. So you're not a wimp. You'll take it in the middle of a
The rest of us wimps, though.
difficult sugya. Marshall, I don't need a reason to call you a wimp.
Is that a compliment?
Well, if you think so. Now, no, let me welcome in people here. We're going to welcome in Dr. Black and Eddie Chazan and Shimon Deer and his wonderful children and Yitzi Fuchs and Yaakov Warman and Shimon Klein, Rabbi Kranz, Gedalia Engel, Marshall Castle, Yitzi Muller, Shelley Zeitlin, Irving Fishbaum, Mo Kushner, Yisrael Fisher, Nachman Chapler, Mark Frankel, Rebellia Yaffe, Moshe Levin, Stephen Holtzman, Chaim Braun, Menachem Yemansky, Ilya Shutman, Michal Avram Chavin, Yeshua Shmuel Eisenberg, Danny Vogel, David Helfgott. Here in the shul holding down the fort is Berish Gesserman and Ruvain Shanit. After an incredibly beautiful Yom Tov here in the Aguda of Fairways, and all the people that weren't here, Michal Avram, Rebellia, we missed all of you. Berish we missed, but it was Yaakov Warman, but it was a really, really beautiful Yom Tov, despite the fact that we were missing so many of our key players. Actually, that's pretty miraculous. Okay. It's good to get over the easy part first. Ki Asur Rav Dimi Amar, when Rav Dimi arrived, he said, Rav Meir B'shitas Rav Yehuda Amra. This is the Pashtus, that Rav Meir follows the position of Rav Yehuda, the Amar Tfais Lasan Rishon. Right? Rav Yehuda is of the position, once he has in mind for Chutzlas Manai, that's it. And it's pigel, Tfais Lasan Rishon. Did not Amar Rav Yehuda Zaklal. If the machshava of pigel, of chutzlas man, it comes before the machshava of chutzl mekayma, pigel v'chayav and alav karas. So that's the sheet of Rameir. If you say Tmuras Ayla, Tmuras Shlamim, it's an Ayla. Amalei Abaya. So Abaya said, Rabba Baba Chana Amar Rab Yochanan. Rabbi Baba Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Ki magas luhu Rab Meir v'Rab Yosi b'hadei adadi. When you put the opinions of Rab Meir and Rab Yosi together, loy pligi. They're not arguing about Tfais Lashon Rishon. Says Gemara, what do you mean loy pligi? V'ap miflik pligi. They are arguing. So he said they're arguing only in a very slim area. Amalei pligi b'magda pligi. They argue only in what they argue about. V'loy pligi b'magda loy pligi. They're not arguing in the general question of Tfais Lashon Rishon. As the Gemara explains, the Amar Reb Yitzchak bar Yosef, Amar Reb Yochanan, Hakol Moedim. Remember, we're talking about where Marshall said it should be a Tmuras Oila and a Tmuras Shlamim. So says the Gemara, Hakol Moedim, everybody agrees. Heicha de Amar Tochel Zu v'Acher Kach Tochel Zu. It should be a Shlamim after it's already an Oila. Divrei Hakol Lo Chayla. Everybody says, of course, it can't be a Shlamim. Once it's an Oila, it can't be a Shlamim. If they said Lo Tochel Zu Elim Kein Chalazu, it shouldn't become an Oila unless it becomes a Shlamim also, then Divrei Hakol Chayla. Then everybody agrees that it is both an Oila and a Shlamim, because he said it shouldn't be an Oila unless it's a Shlamim. So therefore, he's making it a precondition that there should be room left for it to be a Shlamim as well. And there, you have to let it get a blemish and redeem it and buy an Oila and a Shlamim. So where do they argue? Ki pligi, in the case where it says, the Amar Tmuras Oila Tmuras Shlamim. Now, Reb Meir says, what are you going to say? That Marshall meant that it should be both? If he meant that it should be both, then why did he say the word Tmura twice? He should have just said Tmuras Oila Ushlamim. So Rabbi Meir Savar Midahavad Leila Meima Tmuras Oila Ushlamim, if he wanted it to be both simultaneously, V'aymer Tmuras Oila Tmura Shlamim, that must be that he's trying to change his mind. Shmami no ma'adikahadabe. And once you're making an Oila, you can't change your mind, no backsies. And therefore, that's why he says Tmuras Oila. So it's not a blanket statement of Tfais Lashon Rishon. It's only because of a diak of the extra word Tmuras. Reb Yaisi says, no, I'll tell you, you got to get into, I know this is scary, but you got to get into Marshall's head. You might want to wear a helmet, but you might want to wear protective gear, but you got, not you, Marshall, everybody else. You got but you got to get into Marshall's head over here. Marshall figured, if I would say Tmuras Oila Ushlamim, that would mean that I'm saying half should be an Oila and half should be a Shlamim. And since that can't be, I'll have to make the animal a mum, get the animal to have a mum, and then redeem it. Havamina Palga Tmuras Oila, Palga Tmuras Shlamim. Liachi Amar Tmuras Oila Tmuras Shlamim. He said Tmuras Oila Tmuras Shlamim, that it should have a full kedusha of an Oila, full kedusha of a Shlamim, and he thought that he would be able then to decide which one he wants to bring, either an Oila or a Shlamim. The bottom line, however, is that since he meant it to be both, so therefore we say he lets it get a mum and it becomes an Oila and a Shlamim. Says the Gemara, Lameimer de Kula Oila v'Kula Shlamim. He should have a kedusha of an Oila and a kedusha of Shlamim. He thought he could choose which one to bring it for. So Amalei, so they said to Abaya, Hu Amalei Pligi. Rabbi Babachana says that Reb Meir doesn't argue, but Vano Amina Pligi, I say that Reb Meir does argue, and Reb Meir's opinion is Tfais Lashon Rishon, that you always go according to the first language, and that's Reb Yehuda who says that when you have the machshav of Chutz L'Zmanai first, it's Pigel and Yesh Baikaris. Okay, now, before we learn the next piece of Gemara, I want to give you a Hakdama. The more an item is together, the more svara there is that even Rabbi Yehuda is maida that the machshava of chutz l'mekaymai impairs the machshava of chutz l'zmanai and takes away the Isser Kares. So the Gemara says perhaps Rabbi Yehuda only says that it's Kares if he said Kizayis chutz l'zmanai, Kizayis chutz l'mekaymai. Because then he didn't say them together. But if he says Kizayis Kizayis, a Kizayis of chutz l'zmanai and a Kizayis of chutz l'mekaymai, so he makes it more together. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda, even Rabbi Yehuda agrees that the chutz l'mekaymai impacts on the chutz l'zmanai and takes away the Isser Kares. Because Kizayis Kizayis is more together. Now there's a case that's even more together than that. How could it be more together than Kizayis Kizayis? Leave it up to Marshall. Marshall shechs with a machshava to eat a Kizayis, one Kizayis, chutz l'zmanai v'chutz l'mekaymai. On the same Kizayis. Maybe there Rabbi Yehuda is maida that the chutz l'mekaymai deadens the chutz l'zmanai and takes away the Isser Pigel. So we have three levels: Kizayis, Kizayis, Kizayis Kizayis, and one Kizayis with a machshava of chutz l'zmanai and chutz l'mekaymai. So now, as Mark says, you call this hard? This is a walk in the park. I'm sorry, Mark. Not everybody is. Sorry, Mark. It's tough customers. For most of us, Mark, this is a little hard. I always say that the Rebbeinu Shalom has a good sense of humor when he gives a Rav who is busy every second on Simchas Torah 2 blot to prepare like this over Simchas Torah. You know, it's like it's a good Simchas. You know, it's a good. I don't know. Eddie says in his tefillas, could you challenge Rabbi Weiss a little bit? I want to see him work a little bit. You know, let him work for his money. So let's see it inside. Amar Ulavi Seimer Rab Aishia. Efsher Yodin Chavrin Bavla. Do our Babylonian colleagues know? Kizayis Tanan. Did Rabbi Yehuda only say his din of that it's pigel when he said a Kizayis chutz l'zmanai and a Kizayis chutz l'mekaymai? Oy Kizayis Kizayis Tanan. Or did he say it even when he said the vav connecting it, and there it's more combined? He says even then we say no. You said chutz l'zmanai first. It's kares, as the Gemara explains. Kizayis Tanan without the vav. Avol Kizayis maybe divrei hakol erev machshavas have. Even Rabbi Yehuda is maida that it's combined and the chutz l'mekaymai deadens the chutz l'zmanai and there's no kares. Oidilma Kizayis Kizayis Tanan. And even with the vav, the Rabbi Yehuda prata have, it's considered separate. V'kol shrei Kizayis without the vav. So now the Gemara is going to try to bring a proof. Tajma, the boy minei Levi, Rebbe. Levi inquired of Rebbe. This is the third case, the one that's really together, and the one where Marshall goes all the way. Chishav lecho kizayis l'mocher b'chutz ma'al. What's the din if he does it all in one kizayis? He has in mind to eat a kizayis tomorrow. That's a machshav of kares. Outside, what's the din? Amalei zu sheila. He says this is a very good sheila, and the answer is that even this erev machshavas have. that this, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree, is a commingling, and the chutzah mekaymai impacts and impairs the chutzah zmanai, and it's only a puzzle, but it's not chorus. Now, Amal Lefan of Reb Shimon ben Rebbe, so Reb Shimon ben Rebbe said, well, can't we infer this from our Mishnah? Loi Mishnah seinihi. Our Mishnah says, Lecho k'zayis b'chutz k'zayis l'macher. K'zayis l'macher, k'zayis b'chutz. K'chatzi zayis b'chutz, k'chatzi zayis l'macher. Or k'chatzi zayis l'macher, k'chatzi zayis b'chutz. According to the Rabbanan, Pasol v'ein b'ikars. When Rabbi Yehuda argues in these cases and says that if he said k'zayis chutz l'zmanan, and the kizayis chutz l'mekaymai, there would be kares, but only where it's two separate kizayisim. Ha'idach, but if it's in one kizayis, then everybody agrees erev machshavas haba. So the it's a raya from the Mishnah, because the Mishnah only says the argument is where it's two separate kizayisim. But if it's one kizayis, even Rabbi Yehuda would be maida that if you have a machshava chutz l'zmanan and chutz l'mekaymai, the chutz l'mekaymai deadens the chutz l'zmanan. Amalei, so he said, who shall be Dvar Chachma? He asked me a very wise question. V'at Amrit Mishnah Seinu. Now, you have to know, it depends if the Mishnah was taught in the case of Kazayas, or if it was taught in the Kazayas of Kazayas Ukazayas. L'didach, according to you, the Asni Soch Tarte that I taught you the Mishnah is by Kazayas, and even by Kazayas, and that Rabbi Yehuda says in both of those cases, even by Kazayas, we learn them as separate, and we say that it's, if he says the Chutz L'zmanai first, it's Pegel, like Kashalach. It's not fair to you, because you're going to say that you covered the case of Kazayas and Kazayas, but one Kazayas, where you have in mind both Chutz L'zmanai and Chutz L'mekaymai, even Rabbi Yehuda agrees that it's Erev Machshavas and it's not Pigel. However, L'didei, but to Levi, the Loi Asni say Elachada, I only taught him the case of Kazayas. V'shaminu l'Rabbanan the Kurgai say Tarte. The Rabbanan teach not only Kazayas, but also Kazayas Ukazayas. So that means that the Mishnah left out the case of Kazayas Ukazayas. V'savar Didi Dafka, he could say either Didi Dafka, my case of the two is Dafka. V'didhu erev machshavas habe. And then the case of one Kazayas with Takabi, Rabbi Yehuda would be Maida. That if he says, I'm shefting for one Kazayas chutz l'zmanan and chutz l'mekaymai, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree it's an erev, it deadens it, and it would be no chorus. Or Dilma didhu Dafka. Or the fact of the matter is that we have it as one. And if I only taught Kazayas, since Kazayas Ukazayas is also, Rabbi Yehuda argues, Ulididi, therefore, Shiurei Shayerli, it left out the case of Kazayas Ukazayas. Once it left out the case of Kazayas Ukazayas, it could also have left out the case of where you have in mind just in one Kazayas both. Maybe it left out the case also of where he had in mind both in one Kazayas, and maybe there also Rabbi Yehuda insists it's still Pigel. So the Gemara says, when he taught him one, which one did he teach? Ilema kazayas ukazayas, that even by kazayas ukazayas, Rabbi Yehuda holds that it's pigel, if he had in mind a kazayas for chutzlas manay, ukazayas for chutzlas mekaymai. Still he doesn't say it's ear of machshavais, but it's still pigel. Then he didn't leave anything out, because if it's kazayas ukazayas, then it's surely kazayas and kazayas without the vav, and then you would be able to infer, but not with one kazayas of chutzlas man and chutzlas mekayim halaf shiuru. Ella, what he did was kazayas asniyah. He taught him kazayas, and the shaila is, do we say just like it left out kazayas ukazayas, maybe it also leaves out kazayas for chutzlas man and chutzlas mekayim? That Rabbi Yehuda argues even on that. So the Gemara says, if he only taught kazayas, then why did he ask him about the case of one kazayas of chutzlas mana and chutzlas mekayim? He should have asked him what's the din with kazayas ukazayas. V'tibayale kazayas ukazayas. So the Gemara says, I'm going to ask one question that will answer both. Savar ibay meichada. I'm going to ask him one. What's the din of a kazayas with chutzlas mana and chutzlas mekayim in the same kazayas? The shamana tarte, that I'll be able to infer both. The ibaina kazayas ukazayas. If I asked him what's the din of kazayas ukazayas, ha'nicha, it would be good i'amali klala that Rabbi Yehuda agrees that if he says kazayas ukazayas, it's considered to be merged. And when he says chutzlas manay chutzlas mekayim, the chutzlas mekayim tempers the chutzlas manay and takes away chorus. Now, if that's the case of kazayas ukazayas, kol shchein kazayas b'chutz, surely if it's in one kazayas where he has in mind chutzlas manay and chutzlas mekayim. But eli iamali prata. But if he tells me kazayas ukazayas, Rabbi Yehuda says, is still, we say tfais lashon rishon, and we say that once he says chutzlas manay, the chutzlas mekayim doesn't affect it, we would still not know what's the din if he says one kazayas with chutzlas manay or macha. Akati kazayas macha b'chutz kamabayli, because that's closer together, because it's one kazayas. Says the Gemara, okay. But now also, the way you ask your question, what's the din about where he says one kazayas with a machshava of chutzlas manay and chutzlas mekayim? Ihachi hashtanami. Ha'teinach i'amalei kazayas macha b'chutz prata. If he says that if he has a mind to do a kazayas for tomorrow and outside, that Rabbi Yehuda says that even over there it's separate, and we say twice lashon rishon, even though that's really together. Then kol shchein kazayas ukazayas, where it's two separate kazayisim, surely Rabbi Yehuda will hold that the chutzlas mekayim will not temper the chutzlas manay. But elai amalei klala, if he answers that the case of kazayas, of one kazayas, chutzlas manay and chutzlas mekayim is merged, and that Rabbi Yehuda agrees there that the chutzlas mekayim will deaden the chutzlas manay and take away the pigel, that won't answer the case of kazayas, since that's, even though there's the vav, but it's two separate kazayisim. Akate kazayas ukazayas mebayalei. So here the Gemara says the real chap. Gemara says this is really a chappy answer. Gemara says that if Rebbe would hold that in the case of kazayas ukazayas, it's also it's Im Kain, Mirsach Rosach. Rebbe would get agitated. Why did you ask me the shaila of one kazayas? If even a kazayas ukzayas, Rebbe Yehuda holds that it's merged. Surely, if it's one kazayas, it's merged. So hashta kazayas ukzayas klala, kazayas lamacha b'chutz mibai. So the fact that he wasn't irritated, it means that he holds only in the case of one kazayas, where he has in mind chutzah zmana and chutzah mekaymai. There, Rabbi Yehuda holds that it's merged, and the chutzah mekaymai tempers the chutzah zmana and takes away the karas. But kazayas ukazayas, since it's two separate kazayisim, we say that Rabbi Yehuda still says twice lashon rishon. And since he said the chutzah zmana and the first kazayits, it's locked in for pigel and karas, and the chutzah zmana of the second kazayis does not affect it. Now, I will tell you that Mark Frankel withstanding, this is a very hard piece of Gemara. And really, in order to really grasp the flow of this Gemara, I mean, I prepared it 3 times. Although it was hard to do on Simchas Torah, but to really get the flow of this Gemara, you have to go it over a few times. I will take any questions if somebody has a question. Okay, we're going to stop now for a moment to turn over the tape, and then